2009 study session for the Littleton Planning Commission. I understand from previous broadcasts that we either have not been enunciating or not speaking up loudly enough, so just a little reminder to everyone so that the audience, the vast audience at home, can hear us. Any suggested amendments to the agenda that everyone has in front of them? Rather ambitious agenda, I might add.
Rather ambitious.
It's too long.
It is too long.
Okay, that's another word for it. There are 2 words for it.
Well, we're wrong. Yeah.
Before we start, do you mind if we just kind of introduce ourselves so the people on the outside can kind of figure out who we are, put a name and a face together?
Great idea. Norm, I'll start on your side.
Norm Brown, Planning Commission for a year. Kurt Samuelson.
Julio Terraria.
Dennis Lane, staff.
David Metcalf, Chair.
Steve Bucketstead, Pro Tem.
Linda Knipke.
Pablo Savropoulos.
Okay. First item on the agenda, after introductions, thank you, Julio, is downtown design guidelines. Dick Farley has a presentation for us to bring us all up to the same level of knowledge.
Well, thank you. My name is Dick Farley. I'm with Civitas. I do design review consulting for the city and put together design standards and guidelines for the downtown area in probably 2004. We more or less got finished. What I would like to present tonight is a presentation I made at the Houseman Waring lecture series back in 2002, which was sort of the impetus of and thinking behind the design standards and guidelines, and some of the dilemmas I think that are embedded in design standards and guidelines. And it's called Memory and Change in the Built Environment. And there's a kind of a little list of what this talks about, and the first 3 are really as much questions and dilemmas as they are, having sort of firm answers about it. The right of the individual and the right of the community. Clearly, there are rights on both cases. Authenticity and replication. What's authentic to our times and what is sort of replication of a previous time. Sometimes that's important. Sometimes it's important to be really authentic to your own times. And then there's technological change, which is occurring all the time, and we have to sort of deal with that. And then there's a little section there about cities and how they're laid out related to change. And then we'll talk a little bit about change in Littleton, the analysis I went through on that, and then design standards and guidelines, which kind of fell out of a lot of this thinking. So, individual and community is the issue about how much individual expression there is. These are just sort of images of how each individual could potentially design their home or their place of residence. And is it, some things have infuriated neighbors and some things haven't. Even it relates to color. If you paint your house bright orange or bright yellow, is that, an affront to the community? The house on the right-hand side is Frank Gehry's, famous architect who experimented with his house with all sorts of stuff and, with all sorts of materials. I guess your question is, well, why not? And of course, we've got, a 2-story house amongst the smaller ones. There's a 2-story on the left-hand side. This one has lots of stripes to it. Is that a big problem or not? Should you allow that or not? Even higher density things, some weird and wacky residential buildings. There's a tremendous amount of character, tremendous amount of art to it. Should we get in the way of that or not? This is kind of what happens when you kind of regulate things to the nth degree, where everything kind of fits. Of course, you've got the world's largest Barron Plaza in front of it, but nonetheless, you can see these kinds of buildings in Washington, D.C., for that matter. This is, again, this is a Frank Gehry building in Czechoslovakia, or in Prague. And in my view, I can't see the entire block, but in my view, it ends that corner off in a wonderful way and still pays respect to the 19th century buildings right next door to it. Lower downtown. Dennis and I are very familiar with this. This is what happens to lower downtown before the historic district was in place. So you can, the argument here was, well, why get in the way of major commercial investment and stuff that was really sort of ignored the character of lower downtown. But after the historic district was in place, after there's design standards and guidelines and design review, you began to pick, you can see on the left-hand photo on the right-hand corner there, brand new buildings that didn't sacrifice the fact that they were authentic, but fit into the fabric of lower downtown. Similarly, over on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side, and then the street environment itself can pull a lot of these things together. Even the two of the three ugly sisters down the way there, they don't fit in. They're not good for lower downtown, but the street environment tends to help rope them in. In industrial areas where you may not have a lot of communities interested in these areas, you get sometimes some of the most creative stuff. The one on the right-hand side is an industrial building, but combined with art and canopies and form and that sort of thing, all of a sudden this particular architect did about a half a dozen buildings like this in this particular area, and the entire character of the industrial area turned around and became a very in place to be. This is another example of where, in this case, Berlin had standards and guidelines for the exterior, but not for the interior of this building. So Frank Gehry, again, was kind of forced to be relatively calm on the outside, but in the inside, he could go crazy with his, sort of biological and amorphous kinds of form. And then we've got our own examples here in town, where the Hamblen Wing is a building that really didn't go through a design standard and guideline process, even though you might expect it to. It's an object building. In other words, it really tends to want to be a focus of attention, but it's not on an object site. It's not on a site where you focus on a building. Like the state capitol is on a site like that, or the city-county building is on a site like that. This is off to one side, so it's kind of odd in that respect. Authenticity and replication. These are got a lot of other ideas to it. Here, on the left-hand side is a Disney environment, and this is clearly almost like a movie set. But Disney built Celebration, which is a small town in Orlando. That's not a set, but it's very strongly organized around very traditional building forms. And the building on the right-hand side is a brand new building, created to look exactly like some kind of neighborhood building. The question there is, well, if you do these kinds of things, how do you know what is old and what's new? What's in this case 1920s Florida, or 1920s New York? These are some examples. The one on the right, I think you can recognize this. The one on the left is in Orenco, outside of Portland. It's a Trans-Orient development area, and it's well done. Again, the question is, are these the right things to do for something that's brand new. This is built probably in 97, 98, next to a light rail stop. These are examples of, again, this is an infill project in Soho. It actually goes between two streets. So one street on the left-hand side, that project has one character, and on the other street, it has a second character, the steel character, both of which are contemporary, both of which are authentic to their times, but they fit in. Another example of an authentic building that is sensitive to the proportions and sensitive to the openings of the older buildings. And this is an example of a brand new addition to the Reichstag, which is in part in ruins, and rather than replicating the building as it was at one point, it came back and produced an entirely different, very environmentally sound building, and even sort of preserving interior the graffiti from I think Russian soldiers from the Second World War. So it combines the aspect of memory and change. So there's technological change all the time. This is Littleton and having its getting all its cars out for that great sort of sense of pride and being able to master the technology of the time, electricity, lighting, street lighting, all the technological advances in the last century, all of that the United States was a leader in, very proud of technological change, and continue to be very proud of technological change. Light rail is a technological change in the terms of the vehicle, but Littleton was a streetcar suburb, so it's really come back to being a streetcar suburb in a way that the light rail now is able to do that. Enormous change in the wings and occurring right now in terms of sustainability. Green buildings, the one in London on the upper right is called the Gherkin, and it is one of the most sustainable buildings in the world. It is also one of the most imageable buildings. It doesn't sort of necessarily want to fit in. But there are other ways in which the technology is going to be changing a lot of things for us. There's an example of a bus station, a light rail station, or a rail station embedded in the historic fabric. And rather than trying to create something that is mimics the historic fabric, it contrasts with it. It's light and very much authentic and of its time. And we will have more and more of the introduction of photovoltaics, solar panels, lots of things that are coming our way in terms of the technological change. And we need to figure out how to relate to that. Cities are related to change. Our western cities are laid out to be flexible. They're laid out to be democratic. Location means a lot. And of course, the folks who were closest to the rail station had probably a different kind of value, property value, perhaps larger, perhaps greater, perhaps not. But the grid is very democratic. It doesn't have a lot of hierarchy to it. It doesn't favor some sites over others, and just in terms of the way it's laid out. It's also very flexible in the sense you can join a couple of blocks together, or you can, drop streets out or whatever. You can do those kinds of things with the grid. Sometimes it's not all that good to do that with the grid, but nonetheless you can do it. And in Denver, they even changed the grid, so there's change involved in that. They started off with a grid that was parallel to the river, and then, somebody along the way said, well, we better get it north-south, and so they changed it to north-south, and the block sizes changed. So there's even the additive aspect of a grid city changing. Then there are other city layouts that are not so amenable to change. They are sort of built in with the street system to focus on buildings. So we talked earlier about where object buildings have a place and where they don't have. Washington, D.C. is like that. It has a diagonal system that focuses on objects and views, and you have a hard time changing that. The grid in between might change. You might be able to assemble a block or two within the grid, but the overall fabric, you just can't go back and sort of close off Pennsylvania Avenue and, sort of join a couple of blocks together. I mean, the whole idea of the monumental city is that it embeds a pattern into it. And you can see this in a lot of European cities, particularly, for instance, St. Petersburg, monumental buildings at the ends of axes, or Paris, with von Haussmann's clearing of vast areas in order to get these allées, axes, and roundabouts. But it's not a very flexible system. The new urban approach also goes back to the idea of hierarchy and having a variation to the value of things. So there's different values to property around the space, different values, different importance to properties that are at the ends of axes and things like that. The top image is, if you read the black is all the spaces, and the white is the property. And on the bottom, the black is the buildings. And you can see that there's a very careful and very rigid assignment of building types, and the design standards and guidelines that go along with that is very carefully assigns that you can't do a building type like, say, the bigger types around that space. You can't do that type over to the left or over to the right. You can only do it right there. So let's talk a little bit about Littleton. And these are some images that I pulled together. I'm not a Littleton historian, but I did pull together and did some maps of Littleton as it sort of grew and changed, and was kind of fascinated with the thing and can keep looking at it. This is how Littleton looked around 1900. And on the right-hand side, you see the train station and Main Street. And then there's the Rough and Ready Mill down at the river, and you can see how the river sort of curves around there on the left-hand side. And then there's a big kink in Main Street, and then I'm not even sure at this point. I couldn't find on the records, but I could, I'm sure that if we dug some more, find whether or not there was a bridge across the river or not to continue to the west. But really, what that tells me is that a through street, Main Street, was not really so much a through street as it was kind of a street that radiated off the train station. Train station was really the way that people got to Littleton, and so you went down Main Street off at the train station. That's what it means to me. Now, maybe I'm dead wrong, but you can also see that there is a railroad spur that runs down to the south and east-west, and that was where all the agricultural industry was. That's where the flour mills were, and that's what Little Creek is right now. But it was a railroad spur. And you're familiar with all of these guys. Rough and Ready Mill, the river coming right up next to the downtown. It was just a real edge. And you can still see it. You can still see that slough. That's between Santa Fe and the backs of all those houses in the little bluff there. And then up where Electron used to be was the Ingersoll Rand industrial. So there was an industrial up in that whole area to the north of Littleton. So in 1914, the next map that I could find and could draw, you can see the courthouse was now built on the east side of the train station. The train station is still the hub. To me, it seemed like the train station is still the hub. You go off from the train station in either direction now. There's still a kink in Maine, and Rough and Ready has added a few more buildings to it, or a few more mass to it. There's bits and pieces of some residential going to the south, but most of the residential is to the north. You can see that the neighborhoods are to the north. To the south, it's always been kind of a mix of residential and an industrial area, even though that industrial area is mostly agricultural stuff. So in 1932, there was a change in the sense that the automobile was introduced, and the highway came down Prince, and then it went down Main Street, and then the kink is still there. Main Street is still a two-way street. And again, I'm not sure how far west it went, but I think there must have been a bridge over the river by that time. And I think it went down south. And I thought it went down south on Rack, but I'm not sure from these drawings and from the aerial photos that I see later. I'm not sure about that. But nonetheless, cars were brought into Main Street. Main Street started picking up gas stations, picking up service stations, and was on the highway. This is an aerial about that time, and actually you can see that there is a bridge across the river. It does go to the west, but it looks to me like rather than Ramp Street that the southern highway must have just kept on Prince Street. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, autos came and used Main Street, and Main Street sort of picking up those auto services. And I think you can see in here the old city ditch, which in fact is still out there. It's still on some of those properties that are south of Mineral that haven't developed. You can just see that straight line that's it kind of angles off on the right-hand side of the river. There's a little straight line there. That's the city ditch. That's what Little came to do, was to build that ditch. This little gas station is still there, and I think that one of the big issues, one of the controversies, obviously, was Merle's. Merle's is a gas station, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But it is sort of an interesting discussion about that, where on the one hand, whether you try to preserve that as it was in some way or other, or not, or is modification of that good or not. So this is sort of the remnant of the river, and a remnant of the industrial sort of agricultural industrial on the south side. So in 1949. You can see on the left-hand side now that Santa Fe has turned into the highway. The river's been pushed over. There's still, what's interesting is into the south now, the industrial bits are the World War II industrial bits. It's no longer agricultural, but Littleton played a interesting and significant role in terms of making World War II trucks, I think. And I think there's some armaments down there. I think that they built a lot of that stuff there. So that turned into a fairly significant little industrial area with that railroad spur. You can also see that in addition to the county courthouse was made right in front of the county courthouse. I don't remember this addition, but it's not well loved around here, I don't think. And I don't have a photo of it, but I'm sure there's photos of it around. So in 52, you can see clearly now that the highway is now shifted off of Main Street. The Main Street being on the highway lasted for, maybe 20 years at the most, or maybe 15 to 20 years. And after that, then all the automobile stuff shifted over onto the highway, all the gas stations, all the functioning gas stations and stuff like that. The next big change, and you can see it in this aerial, is in the early 70s, where the Main Street and Alamo turned into a one-way pair, and you've got I think this is when the cut actually happened, because you can also see that the railroad spur has disappeared on the south, and Little's Creek has turned into the sort of the drainage way that it was at that time, and now it's got a walkway on it. Here you can see the cut in the 80s, and the one-way pair, and Little's Creek. And then I think this was the shopping center at that point, which is now EchoStar. And you can also sort of see that Arapahoe Community College has now sort of taken over that whole southern end, which in the past had kind of turned, it was sort of a mix of industrial and residential. Didn't really have its own character. But all the residential to the north is still pretty much intact. And this was how it was when I stopped doing this, which is about 6 years ago when I drew this, I think. Essentially how it stands right now. But there are things that have changed since then. You can see that the little shopping area up at Prince and Santa Fe is in there now. There are other bits and pieces that have occurred. So we've talked about what kind of design standards and guidelines might be appropriate, you have to remember that design standards and guidelines are set in place by the TIS district within the half-mile radius, and Jan knows this a lot better than I. Don't go to sleep over there. Jan knows this a lot better than I, but within the TIS, there's a much more a finer grain of change is allowed without going through a site development plan and all sorts of design review that goes with that. That's why you've got design standards and guidelines downtown, is because of the TIS. So we talked a little bit about at that time, well, should it be a form-based code kind of design standards and guidelines? And these are very appropriate to that last plan I showed you, the seaside plan, where you had a very clear locations for building types. You can do this kind of building type there, this kind of building type over here. You can't do it there, you can't do it there. It's very, very appropriate for that. We talked about the Secretary of Interior standards being essentially the guidepost of the Historical Preservation Committee, because these guidelines that were done for the TIS is not really historic preservation guidelines. They're for anything that was designated for anything within the historic district, that goes to the Historical Preservation Board. And the guidelines gave some, standards and guidelines for the TIS gave some direction as to how new construction might work within Main Street, which is one of the sub-areas. And some guidelines about, how you might relate that to historic buildings. But is not really a historic preservation code. Another kind of code is called a pattern book, where you literally say that you can do this kind of style, you can do this kind of style, you can do this kind of style. These are what these parts of these styles made up. And so you're sticking with styles then. And this, again, works with places like Celebration, the Disney community, where it was all based on kind of Florida styles. This is the standards and guidelines that I did for Belmar, and they're much more related to creating place and getting guidelines and standards about the proportion of transparency to opacity on a facade. They were not style based, and they had a fair amount of flexibility to them. You could argue your case for a standard if in fact you felt that the standard wasn't really achieving its intention statement very well, or that you met a couple of guidelines, and those guidelines were better to be met than the standard. You could do a little horse trading that way. So, the Littleton Tiz is within that circle. It's a half-mile radius. So it's all of downtown plus a bit of Littleton Boulevard and some of the neighborhoods around it. And then you can see on the, and of course within that, the zoning is radically changed from the time that that was formative to Littleton. Virtually all of downtown is the CA zone district, and what isn't is an R5 district, if I remember correctly. And again, Jan knows these patterns better than I. But the densities are far higher than, say, for that built up in the residential neighborhood to the north of Main Street. And the Main Street densities are far higher as well. Design standards and guidelines don't change the underlying zoning. They only talk about the design of stuff. They don't change whether or not you can do a certain use. They don't change whether or not you can do a certain density. They don't change whether you can do a certain height or not. I think the height limits are somewhat negotiable on the basis of whether the building has merit or not. If I remember correctly, is that correct, Jan? But it's probably got a limit. The limit of 45 or 50 feet is probably as far as you're going to get down in downtown Littleton. But the design standards and guidelines don't really say anything about that, other than they do talk about step backs and things like that on Main Street. So when bearing in mind all the stuff that I looked at in terms of how Littleton grew, I thought, well, there's this balance between memory and change, and how do we recall some of the stuff that makes Littleton, sort of Littleton, and how do we deal with all this other aspect of change? The individual's right, what's authentic, what isn't, technological changes. How do you deal with that and still maintain some sort of memory? So I thought that on the left-hand side is my first cut at areas that I thought were distinctive in downtown Littleton. Clearly Main Street. Alamo is distinctive from Main Street, and that's because Alamo in the past was not a main street. It was not part of a one-way pair. It was in fact partly a residential street. And so that's why it's so different than Main Street. To the south was all of that sort of mix of residential and industrial, so that was quite different. To the north you had the residential neighborhoods, but in the 30s you had a highway that occurred between them, and that has created a little skinny sub-area there that's neither that part of the residential neighborhoods on either side. So that's how I sort of came up with these sub-areas, was that Sub-area 1 is where we are right now, the city offices, and some office buildings around it. Sub-area 3, which is Prince Street, is really kind of a spur of downtown because that's how you get into it. It's a very wide street. It's not a residential street. And so it's going to wind up with greater densities to it. There's a cluster of really fine old two-story houses there, and they need to be preserved. But it's probably, in my view, it's unrealistic to say that they're going to set the character of that over time just because of the nature of that street and the nature of your downtown zoning. If your zoning was all lower density, then we wouldn't be, talking so much about this. And I'm not suggesting that you rezone it. I'm just sort of saying that that's, those are the foundations. The design standards and guidelines don't change those foundations. And then 2 and 4, those two sub-areas are kind of similar to each other in the fact that they're the remnants of that residential neighborhood, those residential neighborhoods. To recall those, and those are largely clapboard, slope roof neighborhoods of 1- and 2-story houses. So how do you, when it's zoned so it's greater density and with a CA zone district, different uses, how do you recall those neighborhoods? And so the design standards and guidelines are just basically saying, well, in that area, there need to be, if you can do clapboard siding on your office building, that's better than, a concrete building. If you can do a slope roof, whether it's a shed or a pitch or whatever, that's better than a flat because you're recalling that neighborhood. You're not trying to freeze it. You can't freeze it. I don't think, my belief is you can't freeze that stuff, but you can recall it. And then 5, 6, and 7, particularly 5, Main Street. Main Street is fundamentally a masonry street. And so in order to preserve its contrast with the neighborhoods to the north, you want to focus on that being masonry, brick as much as you can, and flat roofs as much as you can. That contrasts with the neighborhoods to the north. And then to the south, because that used to be such an industrial area, the character changes, and it's really a mix. And what I proposed in the design standards and guidelines is that this is where you can really maybe do really contemporary architecture. In 2 and 4, let's try to keep it more traditional, but in 8, let's do it more contemporary. Because you never really had that history of very traditional, consistent neighborhoods. So in the design standards and guidelines, what I've tried to do, and these are always, I think these are good to review and think about these things and see whether they're going anywhere or not. On the left-hand side is basically a diagram that shows how buildings orient to the street. And one of the more controversial things that I stuck in here was that on Main Street, the remaining buildings that were sort of from the automobile age that are set back from the street, as they redevelop, they should be pulled forward and make the street, and make the buildings come out to the street. And that does 2 things. One is I think it's true to the nature of that street, with the 2 objects at either side, and just a great framed corridor view to the Carnegie Library and the mountains beyond, and the courthouse on the east. But it is also good for retail and commercial. People are able to walk up and down the street. There's nothing harder on retail than to have a gap. If you got a gap, then the guys on the other side of the gap they suffer from just not having the pedestrian traffic. So bringing this buildings down to the street is part of this diagram. And in most cases where almost everything comes out to the street in the historic pattern. The houses all came out to a setback off the street. but they came out to the street. There was no parking between them and the street. So that's an important piece of all of this, including, I think, it's important for you to think about it if and when you start adding on to this building. You know, there's a park next to it. You really need to somehow frame this park, I think. Rather than having, you know, God forbid, a parking lot next to that, you should have your additions orienting out on that park. But anyway, as the other diagrams start talking about where you might have brick and where you might have light-colored cladding. So I think that's what I got there. So the hatched is areas where you might have more brick, and the X's down here is where you might have more brick and you might have larger scale buildings. And then in this diagram on the left-hand side is where you might have sloped roofs and siding, and sloped in one area where basically what you've got right now is sloped roof and brick, but it's where you would have it's really focusing on the neighborhoods to the north, where you try to recall what they used to be like, even though the uses and the densities are going to be different. And then the diagram on the other side here is where it's largely, generally traditional in architecture, but then on to the south, that's where you might be able to have a lot of contemporary stuff. It tends to fit with the Arapahoe Community College, which is very contemporary itself. And then as you probably have seen, I don't know if you guys, I think all have copies of this thing. The sub-areas have their own little diagrams in front as to how the urban design of that thing works. And the ideas behind it, for instance, the sub-area 6, which is Alamo, because of the way it used to be a residential street, still has that residential character for about half of it. And then, near Prince, it changes entirely, where the commercial feeling of Main Street comes down to it. So as you get new development on that street, what do? Do you let the commercial go all the way down, the commercial feeling go all the way down to, its junction with RAP, or not? And I think, in my view, you shouldn't.
Dick, just as a point of, I was looking at your other schemes between Main Street and Alamo. Because of the reconfiguration of the roadway circulation for one-way down Main Street and now one-way up, if you will, along Alamo, I see a greater connection of what you were talking about, all of the emphasis along Main Street now being spreading, if you will, down toward Alamo, and I'm seeing a tremendous amount of effort to commercialize a lot of Alamo, so it may not look like Main Street from a historical perspective, but it's certainly taken on a character of a Main Street that did not exist in its history. And, with the advent of the post office on one side and the commercial areas way down off of Santa Fe, if you will, before you get on to Alamo, and all that commercialized situation that's going on, either retail to even some metaphysical stores and things of that sort, but certainly more of a commercial bent. And I guess I was thinking about how to make that relationship stronger, and I guess what I'm saying is, I see just to the south of that where you're talking about more of contemporary type of designs and things of that sort, but it'd be kind of nice, in my opinion, too, to see kind of maybe a mixture of the old and the new, if you will, along Alamo, so it just doesn't have, you know, you don't want to replicate Main Street, but you don't want to, you know, but you want Alamo to kind of have its own, again, pedestrian type of orientation, commercialized, et cetera. And that's what I'm seeing that's kind of lacking, I think, at this point in time. I mean, I think it's going that way in and of itself. I'm not so sure we're helping it. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, if that's making any sense to you.
Well, that's, I threw this one in because I think it's one of the more debatable pieces. Because you can imagine over time with the one-way street system consistent that you might get a downtown that included both streets. But you don't want to have any confusion as to what is Main Street. So what I was thinking on this one is that perhaps you could still build on the idea that it once was a smaller scale residential street, but require smaller scale elements to the buildings and require a different attitude towards the buildings on Alamo than have it on Main Street. But you know, it is this is probably one of the more debatable pieces here. We haven't had anything, I think, on Alamo yet, but it'd be interesting to debate the design standards and guidelines on that. But I think ultimately it is trying to make sure that you don't muddy the essential character of Littleton, and that's Main Street and those residential areas, and then, in my view anyway, what could be you know, the recall of the industrial area through contemporary architecture and bigger scale stuff. So that's my end of my presentation for sort of background as to the design standards and guidelines. Yes, sir.
Since you're still in the discussion of Alamo, based on the comments just made and just kind of thinking about it, it seems to me that some of the change that's come to Alamo is it's gone to parking lots. You've got the Elks Club and the one across the street, and then you come a little further down, you've got Jose's parking lot unimproved, and then when you get down to the end of it, as you're leaving, you've got the light rail parking lot.
Right.
So perhaps if we had, I don't know that there is one, but if we had a different parking solution, then you could take some of that parking back toward whatever consensus dictated. A lesser scale Main Street, I think, is what you're suggesting. Mm-hmm. But the other way that it might end up going is as something else gets developed adjacent or in the area that you find you need more parking. And so what you've seen continues to make Alamo the parking lot for Main Street, which may not be what would be the best.
Well, some of those uses are self-parked. You know, the Elks Club is a self-parked lot. There may be others that are self-parked as well, but you're right. I mean, just look at Belmar, for instance, and that's a brand new development. It's got some big boxes with their parking fields, but the only way that they can really could maintain and create those streets, the two major cross streets in Belmar, is with parking structures. And those are parking structures that serve all those uses. It's something that's bedeviled lower downtown forever. And that is, you know, you really probably ought to have a parking district, and you really ought to have a public parking garage that serves the retail and office, you know, on either Main Street and or Alamo. But very few communities are willing to step forward and build that ahead of the demand. You know, Fort Collins has. They've built parking structures for their downtown district. But they've managed to do funny things with pricing where they charge you money to get in the garage, but they don't charge you to park on the street. So everybody parks on the street anyway. Any other question? Oh, by the way, the reason I got to this slide is that in the right-hand corner is an example of what was on Alamo, the kind of residential that's on Alamo. And, I don't think that house is still there, but there are some houses there that are pretty...
I think it is. It's an attorney's office, isn't it?
Is it?
It's a law firm, I think, yeah.
I'd be curious to see in the future if all of a sudden Alamo was to have another restaurant or something along those lines, which would be much more of a designation or what am I trying to say?
Destination.
Generator.
Pardon me?
Destination?
Destination, thank you. Oriented more so than what's been there now, where people would actually come in and stuff, and I think that would change the character 180 degrees if that was to be much more, and it'd be much more influential to the street itself.
Especially given that the design guidelines for sub-area 8 are talking more contemporary, larger scale. Sooner or later, that's going to drive what happens, at least on the south side of Alamo. Especially then you turn around and look on the north side of Main Street, in those residential areas, we're trying to keep them traditional, smaller scale, more residential. You're essentially pushing the density down from Alamo down to Arapahoe Community College.
Well, not really, because the design standards and guidelines don't change your density formulas. If you're CA north of Main Street and you're CA south of Main Street, you're CA. The height and densities are all the same. The design standards and guidelines are only trying to beat and shape the buildings differently. They don't really have the power to push density around, because that's your zoning does that. Now, if there are changes to your zoning that you want to make, then you could do it that way. But theoretically, you can do the same stuff to the south of Main Street into the north of Main Street in sub-area 2. Sub-area 2, I think, is all zone CA.
I think Dave's point, at least what I understood from it, is not so much of where we're pushing density, but to what an extent both economics and design, more flexible design, may make it more viable to do high-density redevelopment on Alamo than do high-density redevelopment on Main Street, even though it's allowed on both. If there's more flexibility, that's how the design guidelines could say, this is the place to start. And it's interesting to see as the economy is going up and down, rents on Main Street were going through and values are going through the roof, to what an extent Alamo may begin to appear as a more attractive area to do development. It's just one block off Main Street. It's close enough that it can try to build on the appeal that it has, just as close to the light rail, closer to Arapahoe Community College. So it will be interesting as the economy is going through its...
Well, you're right in that respect, in the sense that the PDO process allows for greater heights if the buildings are a better design or better value or whatever. You could take that and say, we're going to hold to the limits to the north of Main Street, but we would entertain higher buildings to the south, which the way the CA zoning works would increase your densities, provided that you still get good design, but we would entertain it to the south, and we would not. It gives you the flexibility to say that, well, there's a little bonus to the south for higher density, higher buildings, but not so much to the north. You could do it that way.
Because if we don't, even though we're saying we like 2 and 4 being smaller scale, more traditional, it isn't going to happen. We're going to lose it. If we don't take a stand and say we want to keep one or the other, we may lose both.
Well, you're not going to keep 1- and 2-story houses in those neighborhoods. The way the zoning works, you've already had that development in the next school.
Bad place.
Right.
What I find interesting is we're getting the townhouse apartment, higher density development in an area that is smaller scale, more traditional, the small 1- and 2-story clapboard and brick houses. It's almost as if they're going there because they like the surroundings. At the same time, they're destroying the surroundings. Okay? Whereas if you really wanted to do denser housing, more urban or ex-urban type housing, you'd think they'd want it to be closer to light rail, more accessible, which says Alamo and south, not north. So they're milking the smaller scale residential areas north of town first until that's gone, and then they'll have to turn to the area south of Alamo for convenience, proximity, and that's where Alamo is going to start developing commercial.
Well, you never know the complexity of property ownership.
You've got another dynamic, too. You've got the historic district, and you've got your list of merit for structures. Probably this house here, which I think I agree is still there, is on the list of merit. And somebody putting together a proposal or targeting a property for purchase and redevelopment may be reluctant to say, let's buy the one on the list of merit and tear it down. Thinking about well, the Historic Preservation Board just finished a very successful forum, 2 forums, and historic preservation is pretty strong. There, I would think there would be a perception that if you pick one of those along Alamo, the 2 sisters, and said, well, let's tear this down. I don't know specifically which ones are on the list of merit and which are included in the historic district, but there are some people in the community, Littleton Historic Incorporated and so on, that might look at you and say, are you nuts? You know, we've worked really hard to come up with this list, and you know, why are you designating this? So zoning allowances and other things aside, there's that other dynamic in the room, I guess I'd say.
I'm glad Dick put this up. I wonder what everybody's comfort level is with the different sub-areas. Does that make sense to everybody, the way those have been defined?
Makes more sense now than it did when I was reading this in the first place. I appreciate that part.
The question that I've got is, as things are getting redeveloped, and especially as we get into the north of Main Street, at what point do those original sub-areas become either obsolete or counterproductive? I mean, I think you provided a really interesting thing, you know, memory and change. Well, when memory is faded quite a bit and change is now the new memory, and or changes happen fairly rapidly or on a fairly massive scale, because that's the one thing also that changes. Back in 1932, you didn't necessarily have redevelopment quite at the scale that we're having now, where someone can come in, basically take 2-3 blocks and make them into one mass. It tended to be more individual lots.
Well, that's a good point. I tend to, you know, sometimes you have to make choices. I choose to try to somehow come to grips with memory, somehow come to grips with recall, but not through a, you know, a sort of a rigid, you know, sort of shrink wrap approach to buildings and design guidelines. You know, when we reviewed the townhouses on that school project, I can't remember the name of that, Nevada Place, was it? You know, I argued as much as I could to make that more siding and lighter in color, even though it was greater density. It was sitting on a podium, you know, underground parking, and sitting on a podium. It was raised up a little bit, you know, with big pieces of buildings, and you try to break them up as much as possible. And, you know, I think your predecessor, Mary, got an earful from the developer saying, well, how can you how can you argue for such a low-class material when I'm giving you brick? And so we sort of negotiated kind of an Appaloosa kind of a project, and that's kind of what happened. But I think that the fight should still be on an individual basis. You should still try to recall the fact, even if the density and the massing is quite different. I think if that were, for instance, all cladding, the hardy board kind of siding, which lasts forever, really good looking stuff. If that was all like that, then I think it would fit better for that neighborhood, rather than having a big chunk of brick and a big chunk of that, because to me that doesn't.
But in the end, the major effect is going to be the change in density, not the choice of materials. The major effect on that R5 zone is going to be the massing of the building and the density of the occupation and the traffic coming to and for.
Yeah, and those are planning issues. They're not design standards and guideline issues. The best I can do is to tell you that if you're going to have that kind of zoning and if you're going to have those kind of densities, the best I can do is to say, well, let's try to recall the fact that these used to be houses, they used to have pitched roofs.
There's another way to think about this too, the advantage of doing this. If this were a vacant parcel, if there was nothing here at all, it was just open fields, and you were starting to develop something of this scale, this magnitude, you'd want to say we don't want it all to be the same. We want to have some sense of where we are when we're there. We want to know when we're on the retail street, we're in the residential neighborhood, and have different characters. So you can say, well, I live in Willowbrook, or I live in something else, it's a little sub-area of that. We've got a natural here because we've got that history, so we can start to develop that character stuff with a distinction with what was there originally. So it's a real advantage, I think.
With zoning and the comp plan and the design guidelines all working together. What I think I'm seeing now is we've got minor conflicts or differences in direction between the three of them. They're not reinforcing each other in all cases. And if we're going to set a direction, as you say, if we're going to say that we want that north area to be kind of more traditional, smaller scale, let the density go on the other side so we've got different zones. Right now, we're not doing that. Now, not through fault of the design guidelines, Dick, or any other one document, but right now it doesn't appear that the three of them are really working consciously together toward clear goals. I think that's what City Council asked us to do.
Yeah, I think so, is to look at the zoning and say, is it accomplishing what we want? I think there are a lot of advantages to the zoning we do have, because there is a lot of room to look at each site, look at each project, and tailor it, to what we're trying to achieve, given what we can provide, so above and beyond what the base is. But you're right. I think that's one of our charges, to look at this and see, are they all working together, and how do we need to adjust those? Maybe
I'm stuck on a concept, but when I look, based on just the conversation you've given us this evening, and maybe this is a little bit of an epiphany for me, and also recognizing the fact that we have looked at downtown and have looked at the area of downtown to include not only Main Street but also Alamo at this point, where now I'm looking at that and superimposing that on your plan here, and I'm seeing maybe for what appears to be the first time, or at least where I can talk about it, that 5, 6, and 7 are really now becoming more of a one type, more like a 5 than it is a 6 or 7, with the reality that your 8 is allowing for the contemporary, the greater densities. And I think, if it's in a history that you just gave us, and I've heard this presentation before, but I guess I heard it only, certain parts of it, but what I'm holding on to it now, where you have 2 and 4 as being on the lower residential, where the term preservation now comes into play, or at least thinking, and yet you have that wild card 3 in a way that's also been a main entrance, if you will, or another main street, where now it's really maybe 3, 5, 6, and 7 are that downtown distinction that I would call, and the rest is where the differences really lie. You have those two smaller residential areas, which is 2 and 4, but you're allowing for the flexibility for a lot of things to happen in 8 because it was such a wild card for all those years. And through its evolution, we certainly don't want to see it go, obviously, for industrial or things of that sort. That's all passé. But it would and could create a much more dynamic area of downtown than we've been looking at, at least in the number of years that I've been here at the Planning Commission, whereas it's given, and maybe that's where the zoning does need to change and reflect that kind of a concept, so that we are orchestrating it in such a way that we want to see that area of 8 develop in a certain way that's different than the other areas. And yet you have a distinct area for downtown and you have a distinct areas for the north.
The description of how you came to the different sub-areas kind of explains a little dilemma we've been dealing with for the last 9 months about what is the downtown. Is it just the area around Main Street? Is it the whole central area? And what you've given us is a rationale for how that whole central area, it may not necessarily be of downtown, but it's an essential part. All those parts together affect and they affect downtown. You can't separate Main Street from those or vice versa. They are a whole.
Yeah, the core area, you're absolutely right, the core area is 5, 6, and 7, and 3 is that spine that goes off of it, and then 1 is this stuff up in here and its rim around it.
So somehow between the 3 documents, we have to figure out how to, once the community's decided the direction, how do we reinforce each of those documents so that they'll deliver on that vision?
And also recognizing the one thing is that now we have light rail that we did not have for such a long period of time, and that in and of itself, like you were saying, Main Street was really the focal point, but now it's downtown as well. Is it the chicken or the egg? I mean, we have downtown as it stands, and through the course of time, and now we also have another influence which perpetuates the downtown, which is light rail, where people are now using both Main Street and Alamo to get to the light rail station so they can go to work in Denver.
Right, that's one of the major changes.
And I guess I'm trying to, I keep hearing that people want to keep downtown the way it's been, but I think to some degree we have to morph it a little bit because of all the changes that have occurred. But I still want to be respectful, if you will, to the history of Littleton when we're doing
That's the
it.
dilemma about change and memory.
Correct.
Yeah, but you may have given us a format in which to discuss that. What do you say? What do you like to develop? We're a little over time. Dick, is there anything else you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think I've talked long enough, and
I think it's been very fruitful.
I'm good. Well, I'm happy with
very
that.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else with questions for Dick before we lose the resource or the immediate resource? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just up the street.
Okay, liaison reports, BAC. Linda?
And I have, and Dennis has some copies of the actual BIAC report on, the BIAC presented its reports to City Council on March 10th, 2009, and that's the document you see in front of you. And what I did is I went ahead and I pulled out the specific recommendations regarding housing, and then some of the other recommendations that were listed in this report. And then I also have a listing of the City Council's response to the BIAC report relating to Planning Commission issues. So I encourage you to read the report because what you're seeing here is my filter through what I consider important to the Planning Commission. So some of the specific recommendations: develop and articulate a vision for balanced housing stock to guide future development in the city over time to allow a healthy mix of age groups. adopt policies that allow some increased density adjacent to light rail and make the policies known to the development community. Explore universal or visitability standards, which is wheelchair and walker access, and consider requiring a small percentage of any new housing developments to be built to that standard. Encourage development of well-designed, attractive, single-level cluster or patio homes, townhomes, condominiums with living facilities all on one floor. Limit additional age-restricted housings adjacent to downtown. And this is interesting, study reducing or eliminating permit fees as an incentive for renovating older houses inhabited by their owners. And encourage the type of housing adjacent to downtown that'll attract young professionals. And then partner with realtors to conduct a survey on how to attract people, especially younger families, to Littleton. So those are some of their key recommendations. And the city council, their response and reaction, Michael Price, who's the chair of the BIAC, he was saying that he spoke with a builder that had attended a builder show, and the builder said the day of the McMansions have gone. People are looking for smaller houses with some yards and a higher level of finish, which I think is the key. And Mr. Price also mentioned that most people don't know that there's public parking in downtown Littleton. Councilperson Trujillo said he's concerned about the housing stock in Littleton, and Littleton has lost so many small homes that never have been replaced, particularly around ACC. And then Mr. Clark, he said that Littleton is faced with such little new residential development. So the issue the city should address is how do we keep established neighborhoods desirable while maintaining their charm. And then he said, do you want to limit the kinds of renovations in the neighborhoods, considering that pop-tops could ruin the character of neighborhoods. And then Mr. Clark also said that we all want a healthy, thriving, and vibrant community. He said the struggle with downtown is a struggle with realities of what you want it to be and what it is. And changes in society cause people to shop at other locations in downtown. And today, Mr. Clark said he can't grasp the concept of building 900 to 1,000 condo units will revitalize downtowns. So that was just a kind of quick summary of what we talked about. Comments?
That's a lot of homework. But it's a nice guide to it, so reading through this will help us focus on things as we read through the full report. Thank you.
Yeah, I put page numbers there in case you want to find it, so hopefully that'll make it easier.
Steve, Historic Preservation Board?
Well, the Historic Preservation Board is, they've been coming off of their forums. They're building their notes and trying to prepare a way that they're going to be able to strategize off of their findings that they came from the forums. I've got some of the notes that they've got from the questions and the comments that people had made from the forums. I've given Dennis the copies, and he's going to be sending them off to all the commissioners this week so that we can have some of the notes. And then as the Historic Preservation Board does their work, they're going to try to meet with Nori Winter again and get all their notes together. So when they do that, they will be giving us and our liaison more notes.
Did they talk about any major, breakthrough ideas or anything like that came out?
The big thing I think that they're needing to do is they're still needing to have the assessments from Nori Winter on what they're doing instead of them running off in their own perceptions of what went on, taking the professional that they brought in there to help them evaluate the situation and getting his evaluations before they do any knee-jerk moves.
But no one or two really exciting things that came out, other than the fact they had great turnout.
I think they will once they have the comments from Nori. I think that they're going to come out with several good actions. Then is this the time you want to pass out the books?
Sure. This is a book that Steve had asked for quite a while ago, and we thought we distributed it, so I apologize. This is the mid-century report that was done for Littleton. And
Very nice book.
it's a very nice book. If you look at it, it's a little misleading because it's actually the historic context of Littleton, Colorado. It's not living in the suburbs, and the subtitles over to the right or the left, and it gets confusing. But that's what it is. So it's great. It's a good analysis of mid-century, and still there's structures that aren't in here, I think, so it may be important. But a whole new look at what is significant in the mid-century architecture in Littleton. Littleton was, of course, coming to real life in the 50s again, with the new businesses moving to town and the real growth spurt at that point. So we have some great residential and great commercial structures from that period.
Now, I think we got a flavor of it in Dick's presentation. Just because Littleton is what you see now, and for most of us who've lived here for 20 or 30 years, it was very different in different phases for the 60 or 80 years preceding that. So it sounds like this is going to give us more detail.
Yeah, it does.
What was this prepared for?
Prepared for the Historic Preservation Board because they were beginning to look at those structures and what are we really missing? And it's only in the last 5 to 10 years people begin to think about mid-century architecture as being important. Because it's reached that age where suddenly it's people think, oh, maybe we should think about preserving some of this because we're starting to lose it. Some was being torn down, so they thought we really need to hang on to it. So this was looking at what is critical, what should we be looking at. And Arapahoe Hills came forward as a residential neighborhood and said, we think we're an important neighborhood and we want to look at least getting a survey done and perhaps moving towards designation.
What's the dividing lines in Arapahoe?
Arapahoe Hills is from Lowell West and Berry North. Is that right?
Very north
Berry
and
North, about a block and a half. It's about 4 blocks west of Lowell. So it's just north and east of Goddard, up in the hills. So it's all
and then just south of Harlow Park.
right.
They were 50s and...
It was 50s, all done by same architects. There's another neighborhood that's Arapahoe Acres, done by some folks. It was the architect that was really prominent here that did a lot of that. So designed a lot of the houses, so there's a lot of consistency.
Flat roofs or...
No, a real mix. Yeah, a real mix of things. Yeah.
Does this talk about whys of some of the changes in conscious development?
Yeah, it does.
I mean,
Sure does.
like changing Main and Alamo to one-way streets? And
Oh, no, it doesn't do that so
Oh,
much.
really?
No, it doesn't do that. It talks about, it's really more of the architecture at that point. Yeah, but they were really looking at technology, they were looking at the era of the 50s and 60s.
A lot of it, the importance of Martin and
I think it'd be really interesting.
Auto-oriented, sorry.
I was just glancing through and it'd be really interesting to look at page
Yeah.
61.
Okay.
In particular. Ideas for saving downtown Littleton as shopping center. 61.
Yes.
Including turning Main Street into, for all practical purposes, a pedestrian park.
Deja vu all over again.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
And it results in page 62 where they put the mushrooms, so if any of you remember the mushrooms, they were not such.
That was not a good
No. Covered up the storefronts, it's not good. It added continuity, but it had no historic context at all.
But it's also interesting looking at Woodlawn, looking at the Littleton, and Broadway, King Super Center, and their
About the top of 65, the Deluxe Motor Hotel underway on Santa Fe.
Okay.
Deluxe. Probably was for the first thing.
Probably was, yeah.
and
Thanks, Steve.
Great. Thank you, Steve.
yeah, this is,
More bedtime read.
it's a good reading. I wrote one there.
Can I point out one thing? The plans for the Essex House originally included a circular restaurant and coffee house with a rooftop heliport.
Beg your pardon?
I love it. That's good.
Picture.
Well, this rich horse
Is there
race.
remember what Bill Bennett's Cafe was? Does that ring a bell? It's on page 67.
Probably different Bill Bennett.
Is that, was that ever around? I don't remember that.
West of,
Give it a address.
Says near the 17 Littleton Apartments.
that would be right around
Oh, west of Bannock on,
where
on
Cherokee
Littleton.
Street used to be.
Yeah, so it's on Littleton Boulevard, just west of
Is
Bannock.
that where the symposium?
Symposium Cafe?
I think this is
No,
farther
this-
east.
This is actually right next to where the Quality Auto Sound is now. It's,
Yeah.
there's a design studio place there.
125 feet west of Bannock Street.
Oh, yeah, right. So it's
The
where that
Cherokee
paint and the-
Street had a fire, I think, and
Yeah.
sat abandoned for a few years.
Yeah, that's where this would have been, is right there. And I like right above it, the ad for the grand opening of the
McDonald's?
old McDonald's there
Yeah.
at Orchard and Broadway.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Very well written, too.
It's just good.
A good read.
And then on the page before that, the for the bank where you can do the drive-up banking,
Yes.
3 minutes and never even leave your car.
I like banks sought to shed their Depression-era images, failed, stuffy, aloof institutions. The more things change, the more they come back.
Okay. We're going to head of schedule.
Well, let me ruin that.
Oh, okay.
Could I go back to the BIAC report? A couple things, I'd gone down there and made a couple notes, and a couple things occur to me from Linda's summary. Halfway down the first page where we have limit additional age-restricted housing adjacent to downtown. I believe one citizen that came down to have input at our hearing for the most recent age-restricted development was not in favor of that. I think, I don't believe it would be a good idea to limit it. I thought the proposal over at basically Highline Canal and Broadway there was a good location adjacent to a park and actually picked up some residential spaces that had never been developed, which was good. So I don't know about limiting age, that was assisted living, but
Right.
nonetheless, the one that, the citizen that came down, representing, I think, a business interest, more or less. I don't know if she specified that Hoodlum agreed with her, but she certainly expressed a point of view for a business in the downtown area about disposable income and so on. The other thing that occurs to me, perhaps, and maybe Dennis can think about this, the next one down, study reducing or eliminating permit fees. If the Building Board of Appeals had extra time, which from my years on it, they didn't meet quite as consistently as we do, maybe they could come up with a list of ADA related projects that the city would be willing to waive the fees on. The two that I guess come to mind would be remodeling a bathroom. I know I did some work in a house where they were removing the tub and putting in a shower because the gentleman at that time was having a problem with Parkinson's disease and thought that might continue to be a problem. So it was a step-in shower, but much more accessible. And then, of course, we see houses with ramps replacing steps to the front porch in particular, and sometimes connecting garages and front porches. But maybe the Board of Appeals could make a recommendation. Right now, they're all throwing things at the TV if they're watching, saying, don't get us started in, 4-hour meetings every 2 weeks.
The interesting implication about that comment, about dispensing with the permit fees, and it says for resident-owned houses, is is that going to encourage the people, the older people who don't want to leave their homes and stay where they are, to make them more comfortable for them as they get into, older and need more convenience? Or is it going to encourage owners to redevelop, to modernize it so that it's the house is more attractive to younger families?
Yeah.
And it could work both ways. I mean, and either one could be
My
a
question
benefit.
is, what would the permit fees be for someone to change a bathroom and add a...
I would say, I would think minimal. It depends on how extensive you get. But if you redo your whole house, and this guy redid his whole house.
But if you just did a
But
few
if you
things-
took out the portion that says, that, like I say, that's why I related it to ADA, perhaps, requirements or ADA associated things, American with Disabilities Act, such as
If
ramps.
you did a redo of a bathroom and added a ramp outside, what would the permit fees be? You said
It's based on
$8,000 to $10,000?
It's probably not, no. It's based on the valuation of the project, so it depends on if at the same time you're knocking out a wall of the bathroom and making it bigger, or if you're just taking the tub out. And that's why I say, I'm not trying to come up with the parameters now, but if a portion of remodeling the kitchen involved wheelchair access to the sink, then, okay, you're going to say, look, 15% of your $7,000 remodel seems to be related to handicapped accessible. And I think, from what I understand and what I'm thinking about, is that it's making it a little easier for someone to come in and say, Mom and Dad would love to stay in their house adjacent to downtown Littleton, and I want to remodel it for them. And the city looks at them just like we did with solar things and says, that's something that we think is good. Long-time residents,
Again, what would
elderly
the cost,
residents in
what would
their
it add to
house.
the cost?
So that's narrowing
If
the
it
thrust
costs
of this.
$10,000 to do it, is it $100 for the permits?
No, what's a permit? What's a building permit on a $10,000 remodel?
Jim Thielen and I were talking today, because there's a study coming out on, comparing permits for different jurisdictions. And I don't know the numbers, unfortunately, but his response was that they're much lower than we ask for development fees typically. So it's generally they're not terribly high. Ours is much lower than most jurisdictions.
1/2 of 1% of the value of 1/4 of 1%?
Well,
I think we're talking about
I think
nickels and
it varies
dimes.
from what it is.
Well, it's probably a couple $100 at a minimum. But
For
there's
the
a
entire
permit
fee, so
fee,
a
there's
portion of it
a
is-
plan review fee, and then there's a use tax. And so if you're just looking at a permit fee, I think that's what it said.
Right. They're not huge.
I think in the overall scheme of a project of $7,000 to $10,000,
It's not going to cost us
make any difference to anybody whether they're going to remodel their
Yeah,
house or
but I
not.
think Norm's point is, if it's somebody who wants to stay in their house, but they really have to have something like a ramp and an accessible fixture, it isn't going to be that
If it's going to
expensive.
cost them $7,000 to do it, is $100 or $50 savings in fees going to make the difference to them?
Don't know.
Might have something to do with, you don't want to pay the fees, I'm not going to get a permit. So this way you're actually getting the repairs done to code and get things done correctly.
But this just happens to be the first one of these kinds of proposals about, what can we do to create incentives or to remove obstacles for redevelopment or modernizing or that sort of thing. And just in the 5-minute discussion, you can see we can go in 6 different directions on it, as far as how serious it is.
For time?
Yes, you did, pretty much.
I don't drink good.
The next session, a lot of it is just kind of review of what we've talked about. So I think we can go through parts of it at least fairly quickly. I know it was relatively overwhelming. The questionnaire, you all have a copy of the Littleton report that has that inserted. We actually did 3 different colors. The white are the ones that are mailed out to individuals. The cream are the ones that are inserted, and these are the ones that are inserted in the ones that are mailed to people, so the Littleton reports are mailed. These are the ones that are actually distributed, and I picked these up tonight here. So the ones that are at the museum, at the library, and at the Littleton Center have the cream-colored ones, And then the ones that we send to specific individuals, like representatives from school districts and other places, get the blue ones. So we can actually distinguish when those come back. We'll end up with a fourth color when we start doing the targeted interviews, when we start going out and talking to people specifically. So we'll have a fourth color for those. We sent out 26,500 in the Littleton report, have another 1,000 have been delivered, another 250 that go to targeted to the VIPs. And then depending how many we do for targeted interviews, we'll decide how many we need to there. So at least 27,750 of those have gone out. Questionnaires arrive March 31st to April 1st. The deadline for return is April 14th. Bob will have raw numbers for the Planning Commission at our next study session, which is the 27th. And we'll have the open house with presentation survey results on May 11th. So we're on schedule for where we hope to be. And then a final report will come from Bob following those raw numbers. The targeted questionnaire, see if I've got this right in terms of what our goal is. Our goal is, as I understand it, is to encourage participation of targeted individuals, including property owners, business owners, developers, architects, central area residents, and representatives of key employers and institutions. We want to compare their responses to those of other identifiable groups, is what we're doing with these different groups here, the different colored responses. If possible, gather more detailed responses to the questions when we're doing the targeted interviews. Do not ask additional questions except for the clarification of responses to the identified questions. So if they have more information, but again, all the same questions. So, outreach, we'd start as of today. We'd start on the 23rd and go through April 14th. Again, we'd have to have those returned by the 14th. The next Hoodlum meeting is Wednesday, April 1st. So it's next Wednesday, 8 a.m. At Town Hall Arts Center. And I will be there. And anybody else who's able to attend would be great. Norm, can you attend again?
I think I can.
Okay, great.
Is that next Wednesday?
It's next Wednesday. I know, isn't it amazing?
Time
I know.
flies.
It's scary. Yeah. We're into April.
How many people, do you want as many as possible, or you want to keep it to?
No, as many as want to come is great. Because my thought with going to Hoodlum is, again, to encourage them to get involved. This is really our first discussion with them. We've had real general discussions in terms of here's what we're doing, but we haven't said here's an opportunity for you to get involved and here's what else we're going to be asking for you. So not only to respond to the questionnaires that they've got, but also to help us figure out which of them, if they're approached, will give us the targeted interviews as well. So get that enthusiasm going if this is an opportunity, and then encourage them to come to the open house on the 11th as well, so we get a good participation from Hoodlum and other folks from downtown. And again, Hoodlum is pretty good cross-representation, but there are other people out there who will not be at the meeting, so we need to make sure we're doing outreach beyond that too, to other developers, architects, property owners, business owners, residents that won't be at that meeting, so we'll have to be doing outreach to them as well. So again, the message there is encourage the completion of the surveys, participation in the targeted surveying, encourage the attendance of the open house, and ongoing participation in the process itself. So, and offer to provide regular updates at all future Hoodlum meetings once a month, first Wednesday of each month. So I can be there each time just to give them an update in terms of where we are in the process, since we're trying to move fairly quickly at this point.
Dennis?
Yeah.
One thing that Julio and I had discussed when we were putting together some things on outreach was utilizing the number of people who have electronic mailing lists as getting them. Is that something that was, I know I missed the last meeting, so I don't know if that was specifically discussed.
Yes, I think that's one of the things that Linda and Nora have been working on too, is looking at those lists of the other groups. So, yeah,
Because I think that would be a great time to ask them to just send something out
Right.
to their own list.
Right. And again, it's
letting them know that
it's
the report is
open
coming.
house, let's respond to the questionnaire.
Yeah, and
Good.
but if we had a standard paragraph or text that we can give them and say, will you please blast out to your list? I would imagine most, if not all of them, will be perfectly willing to do it.
I can definitely write something to them. That'd be great.
Did you want to try to put out the survey on that list and get responses back electronically, or you're just talking about sending out a notice that says please?
Sending out a notice that says you're going to be getting this in the mail in the next few days, so please pay attention to it, as opposed to just stuck in the mail of maybe
Yeah,
I'll
we
get.
did talk about that.
Okay. Just as another way of getting the word out.
So you didn't sit in an executive assistant's inbox for 2 weeks and then
Right.
only come to the office for the
I
last
mean, in
meeting.
all honesty, all of us get a lot of mail, and that may be just something that you won't pay
You bet.
a lot of attention to it, and emphasizing the deadline. Don't look at this as, oops, it's April 16th. We're kind of late.
So other thoughts on this so far in terms of, before I go on? Great.
That's what we've talked about.
Then distribution of the questionnaires, this is again to the targeted group, letters sent to targeted individuals and questionnaires, and time frame to meet and contact information for us. Planning commission and staff contact via telephone, targeted individuals to set time to collect to discuss the responses. First priority, meet with individuals in the red area. Second priority, meet with individuals in the green area. Third priority, meet with individuals outside the green area is what we talked about. All responses are returned again by April 14th. So, are we on target there? Did I miss anything? Open house, May 11th. Dave, do you?
Well, I guess if we're going to be, the collective we are going to be responding to requests for a brief meeting or a little conversation, that sort of thing, then we probably, each of us, should get Dennis some kind of idea when we might be available for something like that. So he has some pool to draw from for the next 3 weeks.
Good.
And I would think if we could get that to him later this week,
That'd be great.
like Thursday.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity. Do you guys want to jump in now with where you're going with your targeted individuals and the list that you can put together?
I guess I requested that list of businesses. We'll just have to go through and
Okay.
assess that by address and find the ones that are relevant to the central area. And I printed it out this afternoon and haven't looked at it.
I've got it here. It's a,
Go by.
if everyone wants to see this. And Norm had actually asked for something within the central area itself. This is actually citywide, so we'll go through and target just the central area. These are employees in the city who have more than 50 employees. And this is something he has put together for us with the contact information. We can go through and really focus in central area contacts.
And particularly the largest ones, I saw for, Charlie Ergen's on there. I doubt rather seriously that we'll be sitting down to talk with him.
Right.
But there's somebody over there.
Right.
And it may take a few tries.
To get into that spot.
Oh, go ahead.
Can't meet with
Well, I think his time's probably more valuable than mine. I also had a question, just sort of out of curiosity. Did Bob indicate what he thought the response percentage-wise or anything might be at any time during the discussions?
No, when they did the senior survey, they had a pretty good response, but, it was like 10%. He said that was so targeted in terms of specific interests that it's probably a higher response than we can anticipate. So we're expecting ours to be lower than that. But we're really kind of open. We don't know what it's going to be. Yeah.
Be interesting.
Again, I think I think we're in a fortunate position because so many people do have a sense of ownership and identify with downtown and feel downtown so important that we may get a little better response on it. So.
Just one question about, as we start responding to requests for meetings, conversations, or otherwise. It probably would be a good idea if we all agree on just how we're going to handle ourselves in those meetings. Somewhere between just listening and being an active listener to make sure we understand the motivation behind some of their comments is an important distinction to make. Are we all comfortable with that? We're not there to debate with them, but we are going to try and make sure that they don't just make a blank flat statement. For example, Norm, picking a favorite topic, parking in downtown's fine, or
Well,
parking in downtown's terrible.
I thought
We do want them to elucidate just a little bit.
No, I think under the goals, number 4, it says, do not ask additional questions except for clarification of response to identified question.
Right.
I think that's
And that's all I'm trying
right
to say.
there. Yep.
That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Because you just, well, it can go on, and unless you happen to be trained as a stenographer, you're going to have difficulty if you open that can of worms of getting down everything that someone might want to tell you.
Or if we let somebody push a
And if
button.
you get back to that and say, well, I wasn't really trying to ask you another question, but, you know,
Well, is that talking about the surveys, or are you talking about the open house?
Surveys,
I think we're still on the surveys, but we're on the personal
I think when we get to open
contact.
house, we can really open up beyond that.
Yeah, I'm still on the survey or the individuals responding to, I got the survey, would you have a few minutes? You can, the personal contact. I mean, this is what's going to stimulate or provoke, whichever word you find most comfortable, their comments to us saying, can you come in and by and we can talk about this before I send it in? And I'm just trying to make sure we understand, we want to make sure we get a good response, but we don't want to debate with them.
And that goes back to John's comment of, get out to the major players, whatever term he used, the big businesses, and talk to them, let them know what you're doing, and make it personal, let them know that you're really interested in what they have to say, but it needs to be a response to the questions in here. Otherwise, you just go everywhere.
But trust me, I've done this sort of thing in politics before, and what they will do is have one or two hot issues that they're going to want to talk about a little more. And if they want to offer a couple of points or emphasize a couple of points, make the notes, as long as we don't get into a long, asking them more questions to pull more threads loose. Don't be afraid to take the notes and pass them along.
Ask them to relate it to one of those. What is it that you don't like about downtown?
That's a good way to do it, tie it into one of the survey questions.
Because when it comes to compilation of the responses, there are some there that are subjective. What do you like most? What don't you like? And if you can get them to tie it to that, then we can include it. And I think that's a good point you can make to somebody that says, well, let me talk to you about, we need to build a parking structure such and such. And you say, okay, so you're saying parking is what you don't like. You can take them back to the question that you want. I think you've got to make our survey sensible in the long run when we compile. Or encourage them to come to the open house and tell all of us collectively, then they can go whatever direction.
Well, and that was the point of this outreach then, to the targeted individuals, right? It was to pull them into the discussion.
Right.
So,
The open house, Kurt, Steve, and Julio are the subcommittee on that. The goal is to present results of the questionnaire, answer questions, gather additional thoughts, and encourage continuing participation in the central area planning process. Is that everybody's idea of what the open house is? So it's to go beyond the questionnaire, as we're talking about. The agenda is do a setup between 6 and 7. You have stations between 7 and 7:15. A short presentation between 7:15 and 7:30. Back to stations again, 7:30 to 8:15 for 45 minutes. Back to a short presentation again, 8:15 to 8:30. Back to stations, and then clean up 9 to 10. An hour there by 10. So we'll have name tags. Doreen has ordered name tags for all of you and for the two new members. Oh, and by the way, congratulations to everybody who was reappointed, and we have 2 new members who are starting as well that Doreen has given you some information on with the new roster. So, and they'll be starting on April 1st. So and let's see. We'll also have name tags for all guests to be completed at the sign-in table that we'll have at that front room. Then we'll have stations, 1 large sign-in station in the front room, staffed throughout the open house with handouts, 11 stations around the room, 9 planning commission members, 2 staff, 1 planning commissioner or staff per station, same materials at each station, so we'll go through the same information rather than having to circulate this discussion. A 15-minute narrated PowerPoint for the presentation, so we kind of go through and hopefully capture people and get the sound going. Probably David would be the presenter. What I was putting down here, but that's open for whatever number of things.
Presenter's fine. Who's going to be the creator of this?
That's true. Bob and I'll do that probably, or whoever else wants to do it. So yeah, Linda, did you volunteer too?
I said I can help you.
Great, cool, excellent. Script, overview of the comp plan update, overview of the central area plan update, overview of the questionnaire intent, process, and results, an overview of where the planning process goes from here and how to get involved. Does that sound like a fair 15-minute script? So,
It's a lot in 15 minutes.
it's a lot.
We're going to have two different presentations?
No, it'll be the same each time. So it'll be presented twice. The idea that people will come, may leave early, may come later, but we want to catch them either time they're there with the time for them to go around in between. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
Would you back up for a second on the stations themselves, because I'm a little confused.
Okay.
You're going to have 11 stations around the room,
Mm-hmm.
and what's going to occur at the stations?
Station is not two things. We'll have a couple things. We'll have a map which says, tell us what you think about the study area. And then it's an opportunity for people just to ask questions. We'll have information up in terms of what the recommendations were from the survey. So they can have a discussion one-on-one. It's kind of what it is. It's one-on-one discussion, and you'll be,
So at a table with
yeah,
2 to 10 people.
right. Yeah. So
Really, the stations are small group discussions.
that doesn't provide somebody to actually record while somebody else is leading the discussion. We could, maybe have 5 tables where we have somebody recording and somebody, leading the discussion.
Can we ask the individual table to keep notes, or somebody
could do that too, sure.
like someone to take notes from their table?
Sure. No,
Or a whiteboard to...
Whiteboard or no,
we'll have pads at each one.
Pads and
So
something.
it just depends what everybody's comfortable with, I think.
with pens and...
Depends on how many people we have turn out, too. If we had 100 people...
Any idea what we might
I don't think
expect?
Does the city have multiple pads like that?
we order extra pads, yeah. So we're going to get small ones on the tables, is what we're going to have.
It's
so.
not too hard. All we're going to do is facilitate the discussion instead of engage in dialogue with, each of us to each of them. It's easy enough to take the notes up on the board, and then everyone can see that the synopsis of their idea or their comment is put up there.
In the last meeting, Julio and I were assigned to do an agenda, and it looks like you guys kind of covered most of those points, but we were thinking of having a moderator, perhaps either Tom Christopite or Dick Farley or Suzanne, if they would want to be a moderator for that kind of discussion. But also include a welcome from Mayor Clark, perhaps, or someone else from City Council to welcome the people that are there, make it very official. Videotape it, perhaps. I don't know. They did a videotape of the historic preservation. I don't know if that's streaming. Is that streaming? Does anybody know?
I think he was going to edit in.
No, he's editing it, and actually, yeah. So they'll use it later. They're using part of it, actually, for a short segment on the Littleton program.
So they videoed the presentations and the large group discussion, but when everyone broke down to the tables, they didn't video that, or did they go around and do
They did
spot
actually
checking?
go around and some tables, from time to time, spot those
And then they
tables.
videoed him going around and pulling the major
All
ideas.
together and bring all the ideas together, yeah.
I guess one of the things I was thinking about too is at the stations, instead of everybody just rehashing the same thing, I was really thinking initially that every station have a different topic.
Linda
exactly what I was
Linda
gonna ask.
suggested that too. I think the question was, is there enough time to go from station to station, or is there enough advantage that you...
Well, it is if you time limit people. But, the bottom line is, my biggest fear is the fact you're going to have a lot of discussion on a very few items, whichever is pertinent to whoever's coming through. But then again, we're not going to we may not talk about the TOD, we may not talk about open space or recreation and things of that sort for the downtown, including zoning and things of that sort that are part of our quest to get the information of what they're thinking about.
Right.
And so I guess I'm a little concerned about that.
Well, I think we were thinking, what I heard at least was that there's an advantage to having everybody at the same table so you could go through all those things. Because if you have everybody might migrate to one table if you have housing or you have parking or you have something else, and nobody would go to the table unless you force them to go, so you wouldn't hear about
That
open
tells us
space.
something. If
Right.
everybody goes to one table,
Well, that's true, too.
like our hotspots. There's the message right there in where they go. If you've got parking and everybody's there and nobody cares about bicycles,
But how would
we're out of luck.
you distinguish that? You're going to put a sign up
You could
saying
put a sign up saying-
parking and zoning?
You could do that, yeah, you could do that.
Put
But
it
the
down to
downside,
the top of the
the
thing.
downside is that you get an awful lot of information about parking, and you have 30 or 40 people at one table, and you have nobody at the other one, and you don't get the information.
Well,
about
then
open
again, you're
space.
assuming that there's going to be 30 or 40 people at
That's
one
true,
table.
that's true.
And I'm pretty sure that, I guess my comfort level is, if everybody does go to one table, that certainly says something. And of course, if you can see, and if all of us are, if 6 of us are standing around and one guy's getting bombarded, I'm assuming that the rest of the people would come over and
What if we
help
don't tell them
out.
what the table is for, just have everybody sit wherever they want to, and then have assigned, you've got these 2 issues, you've got those 2 issues, and then
And then they can go to other
section of the people.
We almost need to have a ringmaster. Well, seriously, somebody who can look at what's going on, what the dynamics of the group, the concentrations and the circulation is, and try and do a little stage direction or whatever.
That's the moderator.
Well, okay.
That's what that person would actually do.
I like the idea of topics. I think
I like the topics.
that makes sense. And yes, if you're sitting there and nobody's talking to you, then go over and run the other guy's table. How come you're so popular?
But if you don't tell them what
They all
the
wanna tell
topic
you about
is before
parking.
they sit down, they won't know, and they may think that everybody's got the same 2 topics that we have at our table.
I guess the only question is, if we, as a commission, have to deal with all the topics, where are you going to get the information on the other topics if you don't, bring that there?
Well, we're
If you
there
don't
to
have that
listen,
discussion on the other
I
items.
think. If you put up a sign that says parking, traffic, and 10 people come over, I don't feel like I would be at the open house to tell them a lot. What do you think about parking? Okay, well, it's terrible. Are you a business owner? Make a note. Business owner says terrible.
What's terrible about it? When is it terrible? Why is it terrible?
My only concern, and I looked at the time, and it's a very compressed time period. And to get the kind of information, especially if you're dealing with large amounts of people, I'd like to see us use the time, what limited time we have, wisely, and try to really focus in on. I think that if we all had the same thought pattern, then that's going to be the moderator of that table, and you get to either we have a list of, like I just suggested, anything from parking and transportation to retail to historic preservation or houses, as a quantity. But then you're asking people to write and then switch gears and write and switch gears. I don't care which way we do it, as long as we have something that we can agree upon, that we're all either going to be consistent one way or the other.
The other option, if you're worried about the time frame, we could do, initially, right at 7 o'clock, we could do a presentation. Then we'd have an hour till the next presentation at 8:15.
I think,
So then you'd have a much longer time to have that discussion.
That makes more sense to me.
And Pavlos?
Yeah. I actually do like the presentation earlier. If we go to topics, my suggestions would have been 2. One is the presentation moves in earlier, so at least it gives something for people to come in. And then maybe if we're going to do it very topic specific, create 6 stations, and they're staffed by 2 people each. And break it into 2. That way it allows for more participation, because if they are topic specific, especially the hot topics, are going to get debates going on between people over there. Having a couple of people that can help negotiate. We're going to have 2 brand new commissioners that need to try to come up to speed. Yeah, so, and I do think that the topics is best. The other thing to address the issue of, well, what if we don't get information? I think it is important that we identify the issues that people feel very passionate about and have very strong opinions. If we find out that at the end of the survey and at the end of the open house, we are seriously lacking information in certain areas, there's no law that I'm aware of that says that we cannot regroup and say we need to do some very specific targeted information collecting to fill in our gaps.
We could do it, we could do the first station, the first hour, we could do that as targeted. These are the topics. The second half hour, we could do as more, open-ended in terms of, go around to a table and talk about.
Perhaps an idea,
So-
if we had at those tables, and we directed table 1, you take topic 1 and 2, we see all the topics. Each table has all the topics. In table 2, you do 3 and 4, and then once you cover those, if you have time, go to the next topic that you want to cover. That way, they would quickly go through the ones they don't have any questions or concerns about, and go through those, and then get to the next one.
Well,
that's
and
on
what I'm
the list.
anticipating is we wouldn't know what these topics are until we get the report back from Bob on the 27th.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah, I think we'll mostly know what they are.
I think we already know what they are, it's just a matter of...
Just confirming, I think, after we get the survey results back.
I have a big problem with having 2 presentations. That totally breaks up your momentum.
The assumption that I think that Dennis was founding that on was the idea that people are going to come and go. They're going to come, they're not going to stay more than an hour and a half.
Typically, open houses.
Somebody else will go through.
Yeah, you think,
But in
the
this
open
one-
house, I can go late, and then you miss the presentation, so you try and catch both.
By the way, one thing I didn't see on this thing is some kind of food and beverages,
Yeah, what's your thought about food and beverage?
because you need it.
Okay. So
Beverages at the least.
cookies and beverage?
Yeah.
Are we limited to what we can do there?
No, they're very nice. Yeah.
It was popular at the Historic Preservation. I think he actually indicated, well, gosh, everybody went over and got into the refreshments, and that was for later.
Right.
But everybody went over there.
Right. It's a good place to talk. too.
Mainly the 2 or 3
Maple and-
tables that
Sure.
we were sitting right next to.
Well, don't also forget that people who know each other are going to talk anyway,
Right.
just because they haven't seen each other. And so the bottom line is, that's why there's got to be some kind of a need for a moderator to kind of keep people moving and get them out of the social hour rather than the work hour or work 2 hours that we've tried
Or
to
cut
do.
off discussion when we've used up the time and it's time to move on.
Right.
I guess my real concern is, are people really going to respond to this as an open house, coming and going? They may show up at 7:30, they may show up at 8:45, or are they going to treat it more like what happened at True Grit? They show up for the evening, they're there for the presentation, they go through the stations, and then once we've gotten an hour or so of discussion on these focus topics, what do? Do we try and do as they did with True Grit and do a highlights of the major points that came out and have another round of discussions?
You're not going to have that kind of time.
Okay, well, that's what I'm asking.
I mean, you're just not going to have that kind of time. You'll be lucky if you get the stuff and you get the comments and you're able to either put it down or they write it down or whatever.
We also bring
That's
sticky
about it.
notes so they can put notes up, on the maps, everything they want to think about, they can write, and we'll have extra pens.
The other thing I was thinking about too, just like what Bob Farley did, is just get some photographs or stuff that we can also put on easels around the area so they know what we're talking about. The mapped area of downtown or the blue area or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, pictures, so they get an idea of what
the hell we're talking about to begin with. And we're not talking about Littleton in general.
those people who don't relate to maps, but they do recognize visual images.
And you know what, and it brought it up in Dick's presentation tonight, the change that's happened over the past 120 years. Change is constant. We're going to have change. And if they see pictures of where it was in 1880, 1930, 1960s, change happens.
They start to
I
get a
think
sense
it
of
would
the
be really
evolution.
Yeah.
interesting to see those maps.
Anybody volunteer to do that? Do the photos and the boards?
Well, Dick has got most of the photos.
You got
If he's
them, we
willing-
got some,
If he's
yeah.
willing, well, we don't need a lot. I mean, you can't,
You're
the
setting
bottom
hours.
line,
Just,
You're setting time.
you're just setting the background.
Sure.
If Dick Farley is willing to share his PowerPoint presentation with us, then I'm perfectly willing to set up some displays out of that.
Well, Andrew's got some too, she used as well, so we've got,
And we're not looking at anything terribly elaborate, but I do think that those maps, and one of the possibilities too is to the degree to which we have a projector, is that we simply we set up a slideshow as a projector. Maybe, and just kind of goes back and forth, and it's over in a corner, and it just shows them. That takes not a lot of space.
We're going to do the presentation, I think, we'd have it there probably, just, it's probably most logical is to have
Could be,
it.
and you could just have it running in the in-between time while the presentation is, so you've got that with maybe some more narrative.
We've got kind of,
I'll work with you on that.
we've got two things going, kind of, we've got the tables around the outside, and then we've got the chairs set up theater style in the middle. We've got the presentation probably at the west end or the east end. The east end may be darker, and maybe better to put it down that end. So we actually have it set up on that end, and the chairs facing that for the PowerPoint, and the tables around the exterior. It's a big room.
So
we can put more out in the front room too if we need to.
You're saying theater style, you're assuming people will come and sit down, watch a presentation, then get up and move to a table?
Move to a table.
Maybe have the slideshow going while the.
I wasn't going to make it that comfortable for them.
Oh,
It
really?
wasn't, yeah.
Okay.
Shorter presentation.
I was going to make it a lot more, I was going to get away from, if you're going to have any chairs at all, I was just going to do it on the opposite. I'd have some of the tables on the inside, and then I have the tape and the chairs on the outside if they wanted to rest or whatever.
Okay.
But the concept was, at least if we're going to go with individual stations with individual topics, to keep them moving.
Okay.
Because if they get comfortable, they don't move.
And it makes it easier for the moderator to go back and forth
That's
between
right.
the tables too, because they're inside the circle.
The tables, no chairs, in the middle.
The other advantage of having fewer stations and 2 people per station is that if we do see people, becoming little groups and not going anywhere, it becomes relatively easy. Linda and I are sitting here at a station, nobody's coming over us, but there's 2 groups of 8 people each, and we go, okay, flip a coin, who goes, one person can stay at a station, another person can try to start engaging.
Something like this, only spread out so that we're we're in the interior.
Right.
And we could move from here to here to here as the groups move around.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is that if people come in and they have a couple things they really wanted to say about parking, and they come late, okay? They come over to the table where it says, parking and traffic.
You're late,
And the
you're
first thing they see, that's it. No, that's the doorman. The first thing they see is 2 of their 3 points they wanted to make right there on the list. It's already been talked about and that sort of thing. So unless they really want to have something unique they want to add, they're going to make sure they get that 3rd point in. And then, where's the table on housing? I want to go and talk to them. So it gives them, it helps move them around.
My biggest concern about any time you do an open house is not what we're talking about. It's the person who has either been, is upset with the zoning code that happened somewhere downtown, and they either got denied or they're having troubles with getting a building permit.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're hearing XYZ conversation monopolizing somebody during that period of time, trying to answer that, and the bottom line is, we are not in a position to answer that.
Right.
So I guess my comment is, we might want to have some kind of like general rules of the evening that we can, what we will be able to talk about and what we can't talk about.
And having 2 people at each table always leaves us the luxury of one person going off and saying, look,
Yeah.
it sounds like you're really, really concerned about this, why don't we get your name, whatever, we can follow up with this, and let the regular
Else to
discussion
call you
go.
back, but we can't talk about
Right,
it.
exactly. So we'll have cards, comment cards there for them, so, okay, good.
Yeah, I think it would be useful if we provide them with standard information, so it's general information about the city, because this is an outreach not just about downtown, but it has the possibility for some people to become an outreach about all sorts of things. So having maybe a place with some general information about the city and the general flyers, you can say, hey, if you're really interested about, the lighting code or the building code, there's some literature over there, go ahead and grab it. There's some emails
It would
over
be really
there.
nice if you had an org chart there with the title and the telephone number of whoever, the building superintendent or the fire chief or the police chief or God knows what, so that we're not sitting there getting hit over the head trying to scramble at that point in time trying to...
Representative, because who knows what they're going to
Right,
ask.
well,
and we're going to have
any and all the above.
Yeah, we're going to have to find a way of reminding them that we're here to listen to them and get the new ideas or the emphasis on the issues that were raised in the survey. We're not there to defend a particular decision.
Well, we can't defend the
zoning.
city on an issue,
We can't.
you know? I mean, for all I know, we could get somebody who's decides to come that lives outside the city and wants to talk to us about sewers. Well, I'm certainly not going to talk about that, you know, because I know, you know, it's not my position.
But having a mechanism through which we can say, yes, if someone is so interested in talking about an issue, then a comment card.
A comment card, we take it in, and then we can have the right person call them back. You don't even have to look at the org chart and know who it is.
Exactly.
Just say,
But it'd
"Fill
also
this
be
in."
nice just to
Yeah.
do an org chart, because I don't think people are even understanding what civics is all about anymore, so, you know, who does what.
Like that scattered around the room. If people do show up and treat it as an open house, that first 15 or 20 minutes, people are going to be slowly filtering in. They're not all going to be coming down, sitting down. So have some of this information around that they can go around and familiarize themselves with. That's another good reason to keep the presentation part of it short, to the point. And for that matter, without the commentary from chair or anybody else, the presentation can be rolling off in the corner. Somebody comes in late, they want to hear see what's going on. If they want to charge right into the tables, fine. And they want to go and spend 5 minutes listening to the presentation, but they're not going to spend any more than that.
Yeah. So you think a 5-minute presentation?
Just the essentials, something to introduce and then
I'd keep it simple as possible.
Okay.
You know, my comment is, no matter how quickly or how small of a presentation you usually do, it'll still take 5 or 10 minutes,
Sure.
depending upon what's going on.
Yep.
But the idea is to make it an open house. So you want them to circulate.
You don't want to make it so formal that you don't want to spoon feed people, because that's not what we're doing. We want information from them. We don't want to just...
But we called it an open house, not a forum, not a presentation.
But the only thing they're walking in on is a notice in the paper, so they have no idea what we're looking for. We've got to tell them what we want to get out of them, and that's got to be on an ongoing basis. So
Well, I think that's part of the press release we've got to put in the paper as well, a stronger one. If that's it, that's
Well,
fine.
yeah, look and see if...
I didn't read that, but
Oh, okay, yeah, look and see if it says enough.
How about at each topic or each table, you have a sign that says, tell us about parking, tell us about access to downtown, tell us about traffic.
And that's what I have on the top of the easel, says transportation/parking. Talk to me.
Yeah.
Give me your ideas about
You
that.
can have a greeter. They don't have to wear a Walmart vest, but you can have a greeter at the door saying, okay, it's 8:30 and we're already into it, but there's general information over here, a short presentation. Otherwise, if you want to just jump right into it.
And that's exactly where you're going to have somebody, as they walk in, it's a separate table
In the front room. So they actually have a
in the
separate
front room,
yeah.
where you're going to give them a sign-in sheet and who they are and where they are and all
And the
that,
process to them, yeah.
very generally, and say, it's all happening in there.
No, it's like when you have an open house at home, a holiday or otherwise. One of you is going to make sure that you're seeing who's coming in, get them oriented, drinks are over here, food's here. Most of this group that you know are over here, but I want you to meet so-and-so, and you tag team that. So that's the way we do this too. This is good. I mean, this is talking through how we think it could, how we thought it was going to work, and now how we expect it might work, and let's be prepared for the unexpected.
I just think that, have we set the expectation that survey results are going to be received during that night,
Not received, but presented.
presented?
Yeah.
Summarized.
And then,
No detailed analysis, but hopefully by then we'll at least have the big chunks and know where the peaks and the valleys are in the results.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing we can do with the presentation. That's the kind of thing we can have available topic by topic at the tables.
Right.
Well, there should be also a miscellaneous table too, because
Right.
I can see somebody coming in and say, I thought that survey sucked.
Why didn't you ask about this?
Why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that? I want to get that information that's not, for all I know, they could have said, yeah, I got it, I didn't like it, I read it, and I threw it away, but I'm here.
And that table ought to be, you walk in the front door where the table is for orientation and all that sort of thing, and they start circulating around, they don't find what they want. That table ought to be right beside the first table, so as they go out, you catch them before they go out. Well, seriously.
Well, and to do both, I think what we could do is we could have a handout that has all the results on it, and the presentation, the PowerPoint just gives us
Let 'em
some of
look
the
at
key
it.
ones, so I think.
Yeah, because I could see the
I want
summarization
to know
of
about the idea of sending
thing
out
that's
to the other boards and commissions, asking for any volunteers that will be able to help us. Say, we need 10 volunteers working our reception table type of thing. The other boards and commissions are generally people in the city that are involved wanting to do things, so, might be able to get, 10 volunteers, whatever we need to help us, because we're going to be busy behind our tables.
I was going to suggest something similar, that we ask specifically the Historic Preservation Board, is there someone that would like to come sit at one of the tables about historic preservation in downtown, if that's one of our topics? So a representative of them with one of us, and
I like that.
Or hoodlum for
somebody shows
retail.
up and says, well, what about that building? Is that designated, is that in the historic district? And then one of us can look at the historic preservation first and say, have at it.
Suzanne, we voted for you to be our moderator. It was hands down.
I was here for that.
I'll get a hold of Bill Hopping and see if he,
Yeah, something like that. Maybe, I don't know if there's any other groups specifically, we could certainly solicit from all of them, but if we had something about, if one of our topics was pop tops or zoning, well, that's not what I want to say, building issues, I think Dave's, people will come in with their issues, maybe somebody from the building board.
I like the idea, but don't count on it.
Right.
I guess, I think if somebody's willing to do it, we get who we can, and we move forward.
The only disadvantage is that you all have had an awful lot of background on this, so you're able to respond and kind of figure out what we're asking for and listen for things. There are an awful lot of people that haven't had that advantage, so we may have to...
Which kind of gets down to the question of how many
Update.
topics and therefore how many
Right.
tables can we boil this down to? So you guys were talking about that before this, trying to get ready for it. So how many, what kind of topics generally did you come up with?
I came up with just 6.
Okay.
And the 6 that I had, and the concept was that any table could have up to maybe 1 to 6 people. So the first topic, and this is in no random order, or no priority rather. First one was parking/transportation. The second one was retail for downtown. Third was housing and historic preservation. Third was open space and recreation. And if I'm moving too fast, I can always go back.
what was that one?
Open space and recreation. Because I was thinking of walking parks and peds or bicycles or stuff like that, kind of combine all that stuff.
Or access to the river and that sort of thing?
Whatever. And then, of course, another one just for TOD. I'm real curious to see what kind of reaction we're going to get on that. I mean, that's kind of a hot topic in and of itself. And I don't think we know a lot about it just yet. And of course, my last one was zoning. And I don't know if you have any others.
Zoning, did we cover transportation?
Parking, transportation.
Historical character?
Yeah.
And all that.
So I was just trying to keep it simple to 6, because we've been talking about that as a key ingredient to all of this anyway. And those are the areas we need to have information on, good, bad, or indifferent, and move on from there. I don't think that the survey is going to address all that. And we need to address all this, before we come up to our final, or draft, if you will.
Is combining housing and historic preservation going to overlap with too many different topics and take up too
I was
much
wondering
time?
about that too, if we shouldn't separate those out.
But then the
It's anybody's call, I don't care.
Then we're up to 7.
It won't be my table, so I don't worry about it.
Well, most people are going to have, if they want to talk about zoning, it's largely going to be people who had a run-in or a concern or something. It's going to be focused. TOD, most people are going to say, what? So the question is, how do we introduce that
Oh, we just say light rail.
impact of?
The impact of light rail to the city of Littleton. Because that's what we're really talking about.
Are there
And
any,
if there's negatives or positives to it, and I'd like to know
So-
if, would you all of a sudden like to live closer to, if you're going every day down and getting on a light rail station, would you ever consider moving closer to the light rail station? And if so, what would you like to see?
So impacts and opportunities of light rail, something like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a sacrilegious question here. Is open space and recreation likely to provoke that big a reaction in the context of the central area that it's worth a separate table, as opposed to zoning, which we know will, and
The reason why I put that all together is because of the fact it's getting to the point of being more of a pedestrian flavor to it, walkability issues, the issue of also, we have one park on the northern, or the eastern tier, you know, I don't know, there might be, we could have and I don't even I call that a passive park, but I really don't know if I call it an urban park, you know, of what you know, and so it's really conceivable. It's somebody, you know, if, I'll give you the big what if, somewhere along Main Street, or even on Alamo, we were able to get maybe what was a parking area, and we made it into more of an urban type of setting where people could actually get a bite to eat and all of a sudden move from the restaurant to the space or something along those lines, where it's not just on one side of the entire city, but more or less in the middle. That's a possibility. That's just my thought. I'm not saying that that's the way we should go, but I'm just thinking, if that's an issue with somebody, let's hear about it. Or all of a sudden you're saying, we need more bicycle spots.
And that's where I was going. That suggests that we could be talking about bicycle and pedestrian-related issues at several of those tables.
But the person that's sitting there would be able to figure out the difference, and that's the reason why we have planning commissions sitting at those tables.
Some of these tables are going to be overlapping anyways.
Oh, yeah. You'll go from one topic to another, and the person may not leave, so you listen to them.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to talk about parking and transportation without talking about pedestrian access or bicycles. It's going to be hard to talk about housing with the same thing, with kids and playground. There's going to be a lot of overlap.
And historic preservation is going to have a lot to do with retail, because that's, you know, historic downtown is affecting very much, and I would say not just, I wouldn't call it retail, I'd call it business.
Well, the combination of mixed use between, on the first floor we have retail and you have residential on the upper floors, and yet how do you maintain it as a historical?
So really what we're saying is, even though we're having these 6 or 7 tables, and we've identified them as central issue is, we're going to get discussion across the board, which is why each of us maintaining those lists is going to be important, because there is going to be overlap, and we're going to have to compare it all.
But having the topic gets the person that comes in and says, I want to talk to them about parking, and they head there and they get that off their chest, and the discussion leads them to something else, like bicycle access over to the floodplain, or separating bike access along Main Street, that kind of thing, so you can actually feel comfortable. And
so the table identifies the focus, but that it doesn't mean it's a narrow.
Exactly.
The concept is going to be a loose open space, or open house situation. We don't want to be overly bureaucratic.
So I have a proposal, given that it's almost 9:20, which is the end of our meeting. We've got a lot of ideas. I don't think we have to finalize any of those, but I think we've got enough of a discussion. We can all, so I would propose that we just mull over the proposals and come back at the next meeting with...
But when's the next meeting? I'm hearing it's the 14th.
The 13th.
That doesn't give us a lot of time, especially, and one of the issues I think we really need to talk about, and since Suzanne already knows that she hasn't been selected, I think we really do need to figure out if we're going to do a moderator or not, and who that might be, and approach them, et cetera.
Well, we've got 3 more meetings. We've got April 13th, April 27th, and May 2nd.
May 2nd, yeah.
Before the 11th.
I've got one specific question that I wanted to get in here. Would the board agree to us asking at the May 1st meeting with Hooven if there would be someone that would like to come sit at the table and assist one of the planning commissioners in the discussion of retail or business, whatever you want to call it? Does that sound like a good idea?
I think we need to keep it focused on the planning issues. If we do that, we run the risk of issues going all over the place.
Or worse, it gets really narrow. all that this rep from Hoodlum wants to talk about is just that focal point on downtown retail. Historic preservation the same way. All of a sudden becomes less overall planning and just in their particular narrow focus. As a resource, I agree with you. It's great to have.
Although I really think it's an opportunity for us to hear more from them, too. I'd hate to have them sit there and feel like they couldn't participate to the same degree they could if they were just circulating themselves. I think it would be a limitation.
And I also feel is that they have a very valid, but they have a very specific perspective and very specific agenda. Our job is to consider that as one of many. Putting them on the table with us can have a tendency to sort of direct it very much to their perspective.
You know, if we have each of us being the one who's going to facilitate the discussion, that sort of thing, take the lead. If you have to deal with somebody who's wanting to go off in left field, deal with that, and you have somebody else that's a backup, if you will, making the major notes, they don't need to be quite as informed as what we would be as far as keeping the direction.
I would suggest or recommend, and this has been my experience, it's almost better off to let the individual who has an issue to write his concern down themselves. Because if you write it down for them and you misinterpret it, you never hear the end of it. And you have just placated, you've created a distrust, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what I don't want to see happen.
On cards or on the sheets? On the sheets. Cool.
Yeah, just do it on the
If we do
sheet.
that, then we really only need one person at each table. There are more than 7 of us, so the rest of us can be floaters. Where the concentration is, we can go and help out. If it moves on to someplace else, we can move on and help out.
Even having just cards and a little box to be able to put.
We do both. We have cards there, we have the boards, we probably should have 2 boards.
Some people will be very uncomfortable and don't want to make any kind of comment at all, but on your thing, that their little sheet of paper or whatever you're going to give them, make sure they have a drop dead date on it. They got to get it back by May or whatever it is, something.
Right.
Because after that, we can't take it. I don't want to see it on June 31st.
So does that make sense? If we have one person at each table, but then we have the rest of us as floaters going around filling in where the need appears to be greatest?
I would feel particularly good about that if the staff are floaters. Instead of have, because you guys have the specific expertise that any one of us at some point might need. And it may be much better, instead of being limited to a specific table, if I come in and someone throws a question I don't know, and I can say, Dennis.
Each of us can have a card saying, Dennis.
Or we can send somebody specifically to you, that way you can provide.
So we've got staff as resources that way. The rest of the balance of the commissioners are there to help out where the crowds are. I think we pretty well covered
Well,
that.
we get Jan there to do development review stuff too, and development issues, and we can get Pam there for zoning, and we can get Jim Thielen there for building department stuff. So that'll take some of the pressure off of these other comments and questions that come in, I think, too.
But at the same time, we still need to keep it focused on developing a comprehensive plan.
Right, exactly. Absolutely. On our questions, our questionnaire, what we need to have.
And we may find it helpful every now and then to remind everybody that even though the topic at a particular table is one thing, eventually as a planning commission, we have to get our arms around all of it and make sense of it on how it fits together.
If you don't mind, we can kind of look at the agenda for the next couple of meetings here. On the 13th, it looks to me like we need to add, again, an update on the outreach and the open house. So more discussion on that, where we are on the 13th. But we'll have a regular meeting for the election of officers, and we'll approve minutes from the last regular meeting.
We'll be in here.
Well, we can be in here, yeah, because it's so little on the agenda. I think we can do it without a public hearing.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. And then planning academy overview, we'll have Tom come and give his presentation on that. Then I thought it'd be good to have background on central area zoning and central area case studies in terms of some of the development cases we've gone through. It might be a good thing to have at the next meeting. Does that make sense? So we've got that kind of background above and beyond. Was it helpful to have a presentation on urban design? Yeah. Good. And then on the 27th, being here again, we'll have Bob here with raw numbers for the survey. We'll be preparing for the annual work session and also preparing for the open house. It's kind of all that's going to be about. And then the open house.
Are we going to talk about the raw numbers and the response at the open house? So we're going to, I guess what's the form of what we're going to tell them at that point?
I think it's going to be raw numbers at that point. Yeah, it's still not going to be the analysis, but it'll be raw numbers, and there'll probably be some analysis too.
That would be
You'll be able to see some patterns.
one or both of the presentations.
Right.
Then. Okay.
And I think what we do kind of, what Linda was saying too, we'll probably have in the presentation key things that we saw, the things that really stood out, and we'll have all those raw numbers for a handout.
What kind of thing are you referring to with the central area case studies?
Oh, it's something Dave's been mentioning for quite a while, is it'd be good to go through and just see when Nevada Place came through. What was the kind of discussion, what could they have built on that site, what was given to them in terms of above and beyond what the zoning allows, given the size of that site, how's the parking work, issues like that, and then the lofts. The lofts came in, it's a very different type of project. So I think 2 or 3 projects have come downtown, and I think the lofts may be an interesting one because it's a very distinct area, and it kind of goes with the discussion we had tonight with that sub-area. Maybe a little different. It's a much taller structure, it's a very different type of character. So I think looking at that too, and how
More of an educating type thing?
yeah, as much as, kind of.
We've been talking about this for a year. City
That's
Council
just
threw that
work.
to us as one of the things they expected us to look at. Why hasn't comp plan been applied more consistently? Why has it sometimes been ignored? Is it because there are holes in it or because people just didn't think it was current? So what we were hoping with a couple of these case studies was to be able to look at it and say, well, this was approved even though, or this was accepted because of a particular feature or bonus or whatever that it seemed to offer, even though it seemed to have a deficit in some other regards in terms of comp plan. Try and learn from a couple of these case studies, what's worked from comp plan and what hasn't.
Yeah, so we kind of start to see some holes, the things that we haven't discussed that aren't covered in the current comp plan we really want to cover, or some things we want to change. Are we happy with the direction that's provided? It's a good opportunity to kind of look at that.
And that will be the first meeting that we have our 2 new members.
2 members will be there.
So even though the rest of us were involved when Merle's went through, where Planning Commission essentially set aside the entire parking requirement under comp plan and let Merle's go ahead, they won't have necessarily been privy to that discussion. It'll be helpful for them to hear what the reasoning was, what led the Planning Commission to approve that application.
Well, and Steve were the only ones who were on the commission.
Well, yeah, but we were there. So maybe it'll be helpful for us too. Maybe we'll see it differently, hearing the summary now. Well, seriously, then when we were sitting out in the audience.
Oh, yeah, I treated it as a trial run.
And I was
It was a good opportunity.
not present at a particular meeting because I was out of
So
town.
there'll be at least 3 people that'll enjoy hearing it. Anyway, that was the kind of thing that we've been trying to.
No, I think it's a very good idea. And I think it would be nice to do it with the new people. It gets them, give them a practice run on what this is involved before they have to go out and.
We want to cover too, if we go through that initial discussion, I may not put everything in that we want to know, so we've got to.
That's going to be a pretty busy night too, though.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be very busy.
We're going to follow up on this.
Going further than 9, or?
Certainly could. And it worked well tonight, I appreciate it, so.
One thing that I would like to include. Since it is the first meeting that we have with the new people, even just take a short amount of time to kind of go around and introduce ourselves.
Yes.
So
Good.
Well,
it's their chance to meet us and for us to meet them.
do we
And
want to do that as part of the meeting? Do we want to ask them to come, all of us come 15 minutes early for that sort of thing?
maybe come in, do we want to do a small social from 6:30 to 7?
That might be a good time to do
Yeah,
that.
to just kind of interact socially with some of the staff as well, and to ask you guys to come in earlier.
Everybody, or do it at 6:30?
Not mandatory, but.
That's
maybe
better than
just
going
show up.
until 9:30?
Yeah, and that way they can come
Linda
in.
doesn't have to spring for her own pizza that night?
I feel bad she didn't bring for the rest of us.
Well, 13th, yeah.
Okay, I like that. So the meeting's still 7 o'clock,
Yeah.
9.
Right.
Then just
But
a
we're
social
having
from
a-
6:30 to 7.
Social 16 to 7. Are we going to have one more pass at at reviewing our annual work session and
Yes.
verifying that we're still going to,
Yeah.
we can cover all of that in one marathon 12-hour session?
It's-
I'm sorry, 8-hour session?
Right. It's not even that, is it?
It's
It's
seven.
a 7-hour.
Plus
session.
lunch,
Right.
6.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to look at that agenda.
Yeah, decide what you don't want on there.
Well, prioritize. It's also
Set some priorities.
of what we're.
We
What are we
know,
going to get the most out of?
we know we're doing, Suzanne, legal issues and procedures.
We're also,
More than 5 minutes.
we're also, I think, going to have to think that we're going to do something with the open house, too.
Yeah.
Mhm. Good point.
Oh, didn't we have that on there?
No.
No,
Oh,
it's not
well,
even
that's
on
got to
there.
move up onto the agenda.
Yeah.
Even if we, whether we talk about final details or maybe even get into, okay, let's make sure we really understand how this is going to work, maybe as far as a dry run
Yeah,
on something.
absolutely.
Okay.
You want to go longer? You want to start at 8?
That's fine.
Works for me. Depends on the quality of the refreshments, Dennis.
Oh, good. The breakfast is good. The
Coffee.
Yeah.
We'll do breakfast. Breakfast.
Just
We'll take 5 more restroom breaks. Nevertheless, even starting an hour early, we've already added one more item to the agenda.
Right.
We're still going to have to re-review
Too much, yeah,
that
exactly.
agenda.
So, we'll do that again next time.
Well, and maybe we can look
Look
at
it over.
what of those items might be better suited for a study session section later on.
Sure.
Um,
It's kind of an opportunity to kind of do the stuff we don't get to at study session, because study sessions are so focused on the comp plan these days. that,
Yeah.
So sometimes it's good to get the kind of overview, and it's good for new people coming in too, because they may not know all this, so.
Yeah.
But look at it and see what you think. The Granite and Panic Button will take all of 5 minutes total. That helps.
Actually, you know what, Dennis, if, on some of those that are more staff-oriented and that sort of thing, if you could put
Just
some kind of
summarize
time
them.
ideas on
Sure.
how long you think it might take.
Okay,
That'll tell us
yeah.
what else we have to work with for the other topics
Okay, good.
for next time.
Cool.
Anything else anybody wants to bring up? We haven't touched
Yeah, I
on?
move that we adjourn.